This is the Analysis in Chains with Nathan Williams and Neal Kieran.
Welcome to Analysis in Chains. I'm Nathan Williams, and joining me today is Matthew Liu. Matthew is the founder of Origin Protocol. They are a platform using blockchain in order to facilitate the sharing economy. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here, Nathan.
Sharing economy on the blockchain. Tell us a little bit about it. What is Origin Protocol exactly?
Yeah, here at Origin, we are building protocols that will enable the sharing economy to move to the blockchain. We're specifically focused on the fractional usage of assets and services, whether that's home sharing, car sharing, ride sharing, or contractor services. And the goal here is how do we enable the future versions of Airbnb, Uber, Fiverr, Elance, any number of existing sharing economy businesses, as well as other marketplace businesses, to be totally decentralized and totally peer-to-peer. So we're actively building out our developer platform and our developer community so that other entrepreneurs can use our protocols to build their businesses on the blockchain. Okay,
so the thing is, if you're competing now with established disruptive startups, right? So Airbnb and that sort of thing. How do you imagine shaking them down? What is the edge that you provide?
Yeah, so the pursuit of, let's say, decentralized home sharing will tackle certain pieces of Airbnb's market, but we're not so naive to think that, hey, on day one, everything about Airbnb is going to change and we're going to supplant Airbnb. But we are very, very excited to begin offering an alternative that allows hosts and renters on both sides to transact in a peer-to-peer way. This enables them to transact without the same transaction fees that Airbnb will charge. It allows censorship resistance, so there are certain markets where Airbnb is outright banned or very heavily regulated that a protocol like ours will enable these services to exist. And it also allows the early participants in this new decentralized home sharing market to actually participate and get a stake in the network. We see this as a very long-term project and platform. Again, let's just talk about Airbnb. Airbnb right now is focused on short-term vacation rentals for the most part. But home sharing has many other niches and verticals that Airbnb doesn't address. So you can think about things like corporate apartments. You can think about foreign exchange student leases that are 2-3 months in length, this slightly awkward period of rentals that isn't really being addressed in the market today. And beyond Airbnb, we also think that there are a lot of other categories that really are not fully addressed. And so by enabling these protocols, we enable other businesses, other entrepreneurs to start chipping away at some of these monopolies, at some of these monolithic companies that are kind of calling the shots right now.
Now, when you call yourself a protocol, does that mean that you're creating sort of like the blockchain tools themselves, or are you imagining yourself sort of being a replacement for Airbnb? Because the way you're talking about it, it sounds like your aim is to be more decentralized.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are trying to build a set of open source protocols. All this code will be publicly viewable, and we invite many different developers to contribute to it. We actually already have dozens of developers contributing to our open source code base on GitHub. The idea here is that you have a set of protocols which act as standards, a common language as to how you represent listings, how you represent user identity and reputation, how you do things like escrow and dispute management. Now, there are many different types of marketplace businesses, and each of them may have slight customizations, and so therefore we have to make the protocols flexible enough. But the goal here is that we can do a lot of the heavy technological and engineering work on the blockchain through a fairly complex set of smart contracts, as well as using IPFS for our static data storage, and provide this intermediary layer on top of the Ethereum blockchain, but below the application layer that allows other developers to build really full-featured applications. So it's just to be clear, it's not that we would ourselves build a decentralized Airbnb. We're providing a lot of the technology that will allow other businesses to build their versions of decentralized Airbnb or decentralized Fiverr and a whole host of other types of verticals.
No, it's just interesting when you're talking about becoming more decentralized, because it brings up a whole new area of regulatory challenge. Now, because the sharing economy is so new, they've already run into enormous amounts of regulatory challenges. And it's funny that being in the blockchain era, they seem sort of old right now. But from a regulatory point of view, they are still new. I mean, Uber ran into all sorts of challenges with the taxi lobbies all around the world and are still fighting them. Airbnb, for example, had many issues in places such as New York and other cities where they were banned because of regulatory challenges. Do you think that being decentralized would make it harder for governments to enforce these sort of challenges on people?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think of regulation, we actually see that Airbnb and Uber and other companies have done a great job to push things forward. If we are proponents, and we are, that commerce should be more open and democratic and decentralized, and buyers and sellers should be able to transact the way that they want to, obviously in accordance with local laws. We do think that Airbnb and Uber have done a pretty solid job of pushing the conversation forward, especially against some of these older established incumbent industries like the taxi industry and the hotel industry. Now, when we think about what we can do further, we do think that decentralization can make it easier to push forward this future where buyers and sellers are able to transact directly. By the nature of being decentralized and not having a single point of failure, it is much, much harder for, let's say, a local regulatory body to say, hey, we want to change the rules on everyone right now. And right now, Airbnb is banned. So it becomes much, much harder to enable that broad strokes type of reckless regulatory control, just because now it's all individual renters and hosts that are interacting on the blockchain. There isn't this single point of failure.
Well, it's the same sort of issue with Bitcoin, right? I remember, Bitcoin was started by a group of crypto anarchists, and I think that spirit is still alive and well in a lot of the crypto projects that I've been talking to today. Although I think we're seeing more maturity in the market as people are going in and trying to figure out how to build a business on top of it. But I don't know. It's an interesting problem, because as things get more distributed, regulations and laws will undoubtedly have to keep up, and then hopefully it will be for the better. But I can sort of see it as a double-edged sword. That maybe as these things come up and regulation struggles to keep up, maybe, it won't be protecting the old guard business, and it will allow for a democratization. But I wonder if it would lead to something like people being taken advantage of, especially the smaller players that might not have the same knowledge. Do you think that that might be an issue?
So I certainly think that decentralization is not a one-size-fits-all or an instant panacea or silver bullet. So
you get points, by the way, for using the word panacea. I like that word. It's a word you don't hear too often. Good word.
Yeah. So I think there's the philosophy and ideology of why having decentralized marketplaces and commerce are better. And there are also practical implications, some of which you've addressed. So by no means are we suggesting that hey, let's launch this platform out into the world, and there should not be any type of governance over the network, and there shouldn't be any types of standards on how buyers and sellers interact, and that it should be just a complete, wild, wild west where people are taking advantage of each other and scamming each other.
Although that is fun.
It's very, very fun.
The Wild West is why a lot of people started in on this road.
Yeah, so that's true. But ultimately, what we're trying to do at Origin, and I think what the best projects and entrepreneurs are trying to do, is actually create lasting value while sticking to some of these philosophical ideals around decentralization. And to add value and to actually have impact, we have to do the right thing, right? And so it's not we're certainly not anarchists. We're certainly not, going to be naive about some of the challenges we face. The better question is not, hey, are there going to be some challenges around reputation or dispute management or potential scammers? It's how do we address these existing problems in more thoughtful and creative ways? And that is a long and challenging process. So today, there isn't, for example, a set of great protocols that are live and functioning and widely adopted for dispute management or arbitration. There are new projects in this space. There are new projects in decentralized insurance. These are very exciting, but still early experiments. Yeah. So this process of solving some of these challenges that exist today, I think will take some time. And that could also mean that in the early days, and it probably should mean in the early days, that we still rely on some of those same principles, right? So how do we offer slightly centralized insurance or dispute management to different platforms, different users on top of the platform? And also, how do we make user identity and reputation extremely robust as the primary line of defense against bad behavior? And the interesting thing to us, while this is still early, is that there are a lot of these new game theory, crypto economic incentives, all these new ways of tackling the problem that did not exist 5 or 10 years ago. And so to us, they're very, very intriguing theses and hypotheses on how we can solve some of these challenges in brand new ways.
Well, I mean, obviously the way that Airbnb and and Uber have solved it is just with their acting as sort of their own regulator, right? So they're centralized, so
Correct.
They can just keep track of, okay, who's on the system. If there's a regulatory challenge from outside, they can step in and defend it. If there's people who are misusing the system, they have a voting system that's internal where they can have dispute resolution, kick people off the system, handle payments through the system. I could imagine it being quite an interesting challenge going forward. And I think that there are honestly a lot of companies that are going to have to deal with this going forward, which is how do you make sure the actors in a decentralized system are acting honorably, or how do you incentivize this?
Correct.
And I don't know, have you seen any concrete things so far? I mean, I guess from my point of view, just KYC, like using something like a digital identity, would be a start. But I don't know.
Yeah, so let's talk about two things, and they're not necessarily directly related to Origin, but they're examples of how these incentives and these new decentralized systems can actually enforce good behavior. The first of which is just Bitcoin itself, as well as these new blockchains like Ethereum, whatever it may be, that are essentially distributed and trustless, right? But the right incentives are created into the software itself so that miners on these platforms have their best interest in actually adding valid transaction data to the next blocks. And they're rewarded from an economics standpoint with new Bitcoin, new Ethereum, new Monero, et cetera. And thus far, that has proven to be very, very successful. And these kind of early blockchains and cryptocurrencies have shown us that it may take a fairly ingenious algorithm or scheme or way of setting up the fundamental software architecture, but it can definitely be achieved. Now, the next order problem of how do you create the same incentives or better incentives for more complex behaviors like actual commerce in our case, that is still early, right? And so we have to do our jobs as founders. Other companies and projects also have to do their jobs to really make sure that these incentives are properly aligned. And as you said, the actors are acting in good faith and doing the right things on the platform. You alluded to KYC, and I think that's like one part of the identity equation, right? So there are ways where on the blockchain you can validate who you are from an offline perspective, whether that's very basic things like email address and phone number, or social media profiles like Facebook and Twitter, or even ways to actually get your driver's license or other government-issued identity documents associated with your wallet. And so that work will be important because identity is going to be a huge piece of it when you're talking about decentralized exchange of goods and services. And so we think that there's been a lot of really interesting work there. As an industry, we still need to advance that even further, but it's thus far been a pretty strong start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of this is because blockchain, it starts sort of with Bitcoin and with this idea of sort of an anonymous currency. And the thing is, people act very differently when they think they're anonymous than when they don't. And, privacy questions aside, just having that digital identity to interact with a system, I think would make a very big difference in how many people would be willing to act poorly, to put it lightly, or because there's a lot of potential for fraud when you're dealing with a sharing economy, especially when something's virtual. And I suppose that just having that security of identity would be a really good start. Yeah, and yes, Bitcoin started pseudo-anonymous, but that's not the complete picture. So from our perspective, and I think from many other people in the industry, it's not so much are you anonymous or not, it's what data are you willing to share at what time, and the user should have control of their own data, their own identity, their own reputational history. And for certain types of interactions, and this could be, hey, I just want to send some Bitcoin or Monero, then anonymity is desired in that case. In other cases, if we're saying, hey, I want to rent a stranger's house, then identity on both parts is important. And that can actually be achieved on the blockchain. Both of those use cases can be achieved. And so it's really how much control does that individual user have over their identity, over specific use cases that they may have. Does that make sense? Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Especially because I think Bitcoin itself is not as anonymous as people tend to think it is. You can see everything that has ever happened on the Bitcoin blockchain, and everyone who has ever received Bitcoin payments. It's just you don't know the name; you only know their wallet address. That's correct. I wanted to go into something that you just got me thinking of as we were talking, and it's this idea of capital incentives. Now, using incentives, using the token capitalization to incentivize behavior has worked exceptionally well for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, all of these fundamental blockchains, because you're incentivizing people with tokens that are worth money in order to maintain the integrity of the system and to participate running full nodes. I'm wondering what the limitations of capital incentives might be. And I'm just thinking out loud here, but usually when you have regulatory bodies step in, it's because the capital incentives aren't enough to promote the kind of behavior you want. And so, like, I'm imagining, like, with a sharing economy, as long as it's limited, it's one thing, but as it grows and becomes more and more democratized, you may end up having something like a market for lemons or a tragedy of the commons type of problem. Are you familiar with those? Yeah. With those concepts? Yeah. I'm just wondering if you imagine something like that being a danger that we face, or maybe a danger on the right road.
What do you mean by a danger on the right road?
Oh, I don't know. I use that term a lot, honestly. It's whenever I always see this is just how I sort of view technological advancements, is that they create problems and they solve problems. The problems they solve should be today's problems, and the problems they create are problems that you have to solve tomorrow. Sure. So that's why I say it's like anything that comes that might be a problem is a danger on the right road because it's solving today's problems.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's a great question. I'll be 100% honest with you. It's really, really hard to predict.
Yeah.
As with all disruptive technology movements, whether it's the blockchain or artificial intelligence, or even just the mobile platforms or the internet itself, there are a lot of unexpected things, unknowns that are fairly impossible to predict from the initial vantage point. And we're very, very early in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world. So I think there are strong hypotheses that using these crypto economic systems and using blockchain to create trustless, decentralized systems can fundamentally change the way that people interact and can impact people in a very positive way. I fully agree with you that there are plenty of areas that remain unknown, where there may be risks that the original incentive systems, the original software architecture may not have been designed properly, and it may actually create additional problems in the long term in specific cases. But that doesn't mean that we as entrepreneurs don't actually embrace those challenges and tackle them head on, and agree as by a matter of principle in starting these projects that we will do our best to anticipate how to create the best systems, and if they don't work, what can we do to fine-tune these systems so that we can actually have a highly functioning platform with good actors, and we're able to create the right disincentives to punish the bad actors. So in this way, like, we've seen, advancements to the Ethereum platform, we've seen Bitcoin forks, and not all of this is nice and clean. Sometimes it gets pretty messy, but in general, I would say we're moving in the right direction to, over time, create better and better incentives, as well as these rules embedded in the software to get people moving in the right direction.
That makes sense to me. I mean, honestly, I was talking a couple of weeks ago with the CEO of Valtoro, Josh Shigala, and he was on the show. We actually met up in person here in Berlin, and he's an OG crypto guy. He's been involved before Mt. Gox, and he's really loves the whole crypto anarchist sort of movement, the decentralized models, and what he was saying was the interesting part of all of this blockchain revolution is that you can test new economic systems, new incentive systems, entire new theories with no bloodshed. It's, and maybe they'll work and maybe they won't, but I mean, throughout history, whenever you wanted to try a new economic model, like let's try communism or let's try, something, there had to be some sort of bloody revolution. Whereas, when Bitcoin came out, people started saying, what if we had a demurrage coin where it lost value if you hold on to it, but then it maintains its value if you spend it? What would happen? And everyone got excited about it. And then a few weeks later, the price went through the floor because it just didn't work. And then no one died over that.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I think that when we're dealing with this sort of thing, the beauty is that we can't predict all the consequences, and the unintended consequences are going to happen. But the good thing is that we can probably test it without a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to expand on that a little bit, I think if you look at any of the major disruptive technology movements in the past couple of decades, in hindsight, they seem pretty obvious. But going forward, from the initial starting point, there was a lot of experimentation, right? There are a lot of tests, there are a lot of failures before you end up with something like a Google, or you end up with something like an Uber. There's a very collective movement of many, many entrepreneurs, many people contributing to technology movements that ultimately lead to products and services that hopefully change people's lives for the better. And so,
yeah, wasn't Google like 45th, or something like that, or 46th, something like that?
Yeah, I don't know.
They were not first.
But they were very far from first. I don't think it was quite the 45th search engine, but it was probably the 10th or 15th. And so, in a way, we see this as almost like the collective trying to further the advancement of technology. And the one really interesting piece about blockchain and cryptocurrencies is that it has a very, very captive audience. People all over the world in this global community really care about many of these experiments that project founders are undertaking. And so the rate of experimentation and also the type of experimentation, like you mentioned, so actual like economic policies and governance policies are really, really fascinating. This isn't just hey, let's launch this small product to a very small set of users and see what happens. There's actually many complementary, some competitive, but all in parallel type of projects tackling the same large problem space here. And like you said, there are many different economic models, incentive structures, security models, privacy models, governance models, permissioning models, all these things being tested right now. And I think it's really, really interesting. And hopefully within the next decade, we'll see some of those models converge into systems that are really, really useful and really, really global in scale.
I want to bring it back to you for a little bit. You guys are running out of San Francisco, correct?
That's right.
Has it been in your, I mean, maybe you only have your own challenge to compare against, but I'm just wondering, how has it been running out of the States? You hear a lot about U.S. regulatory structure, SEC being difficult to deal with, regulations being challenging, but then you had the head of the CTFC or CFTC or whatever that acronym was, giving a positive message recently, saying that they should regulate crypto and do no harm. How has it been for you running this project out of the U.S.?
Yeah, so in general, I'd say the United States has more comprehensive and more restrictive regulations around cryptocurrencies, but also just other types of financial instruments, right? So there's a lot of ongoing discussion right now as to what is the right way to play in this disruptive industry that everyone knows is going to have a huge impact, and what are the ways that we as founders and other companies that we know can be very thoughtful and very strategic to make sure we're complying with all U.S. laws, while also being thought leaders on how to shape this industry. Right, this is a brand new thing for the U.S. government and for most global governments abroad as well. So we have seen that some of our peers in other countries are doing certain actions or undergoing certain tactics that would, if they were in the United States, would be very, very high risk activities. And so in those instances, we're choosing to take much more, again, thoughtful, strategic, conservative approaches on a lot of these different issues. From a philosophical standpoint, ultimately, I think that the industry does need to mature. In the past couple of years, we have seen certain projects not being able to deliver on their promises, not being able to hit certain milestones, and even in some cases being outright scams. And so that's not good for anyone, right? So we as an industry need to mature, and we need to be able to deliver actually useful technology to the community. We need to be able to hit our milestones. We need to actually get in the hands of users. And I think the more we do that, the less quote, quote, restrictive the regulatory stuff will seem, right? I think at the heart of it, for those entrepreneurs and those projects that are actually trying to do the right thing, there's a little bit of uncertainty in the air right now and how the SEC or other US regulatory bodies are going to create the right rules and things and related things like that. But ultimately, we believe and remain very optimistic and bullish that the right amount of regulation will be in place where the projects that are actually trying to do meaningful work and not taking advantage of market conditions to do irresponsible things or scam folks in the community, they'll still have a very large and fertile ground to build their products and services.
If you had it to do over, would you choose the US again?
Well, that's
a loaded question. The answer is always yes.
there are many. Every situation is different, right? And so, being in the United States, in San Francisco, we have a lot of world-class engineers that are interested in working on our project. Also, I think that the United States probably holds the highest bar in terms of protecting the community of would-be investors and or consumers of these products, these utility tokens, these cryptocurrencies. So it is a little bit more restrictive potentially, but if you're complying and doing the right thing in the United States, you're highly likely also doing the right thing in international countries. And because these blockchain movements are so international in nature, and you want to be in global markets, it's almost like hold yourself to a very high standard, do the right thing, don't take advantage of any people, have the best of intentions. And if you're able to do that successfully in the United States, more likely than not, then you're probably also going to be in a fairly good position as you look to expand your global community and be in other markets in Asia and Europe, in South America, and Africa, Australia, and really pull off this global movement. And so again, it's one of those things where unless you're able to go back to the point in time where you're able to start your project in the United States, but concurrently start it as a separate entity in Asia and concurrently start it as a separate entity in Europe, and see how those three different projects progress, it's really hard to say what is better, what is worse. I think the important thing is, as an entrepreneur or a project founder, build something with the best of intentions, think in the long term, try to actually have impact, and do the other things that are pretty essential and pretty well documented in the quote, quote, traditional startup world, right? Hire the very best team, work with the very best investors and partners, have a focused mission, build something that can actually have people rally behind it, that actually solves real world problems. And if you do that, yes, there's additional regulatory stuff, but there's also a lot of additional opportunity with just how passionate the community is about what you're doing. And then just do the best you can and be the best entrepreneur and be the best person that you can be.
I think those are words to live by. So as we sign off, I just want to ask, what should we expect from Origin Protocol in the next quarter? Yeah,
so we're very actively trying to further our technology platform. So we have an alpha at demo.originprotocol.com right now. Encourage everyone that's listening to this to give it a try, give us feedback. But we're working on future versions right now where we'll have a much more robust set of features, as well as the early parts of our developer platform. We're releasing Origin.js, which is going to be our JavaScript API that allows developers all over the world with just JavaScript to interface with the blockchain. This is our attempt at making it way simpler for people to work on decentralized marketplaces. Not a whole lot of engineers are very well versed in Solidity, but many, many more are very experienced in JavaScript. We're looking to continue to grow our partnership base. We have about 24 partners signed up, committed to building on top of our platform when we're launching today, and we hope to increase that number by fivefold, tenfold by the time we launch. In addition to that, we want to increase the community that knows about us. We've been thrilled and humbled to see so many people around the world believing in our mission, rallying around our cause. When we attend community events in various cities, it's always a surprise, but also just a great feeling and a blessing to see that folks already know about what we're working on, know about our project, and have really thoughtful feedback or words of encouragement. We really see that this is not a mission and endeavor that we can pull off on our own. We really need more folks that are passionate about what we're doing, that are passionate about decentralized marketplaces, of creating new commercial applications, of creating new ways of peer-to-peer commerce, all working towards a common mission. And so we really are excited to push forward on all these fronts and then further engage with the individuals all over the world that are supporting us.
Well, that's really exciting. Thank you so much for joining me, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. It was great being here.
All right. So Matthew Liu, co-founder of Origin Protocol. You can visit it and check out what they're doing at www.originprotocol.com. They've got a lot coming up, and we thank you so much for coming on the show, Matthew.